Hello. Hopefully you can see and hear us correctly. My name is Monika Górska, and I'm here with my colleague, Lena Marcinoska. We are both lawyers, and we are working at Wardyński and Partners, which is a law firm here based in Warsaw. And we are very happy to be here on a Friday evening, and hopefully we will have a chance to share our experience and tell you a little bit about what to do and what not to do when you want to use a real person in your game. So let's get started. So the first question is, well, obviously, why and when is it okay, and when is it legal to use a real person? Why is it important to do it lawfully? First of all, because if you don't have the consent, or if you infringe someone else's rights, your game can be taken down from a distribution platform. You can get in a lot of trouble with your publisher or a distribution company. So and you will note that distribution contracts usually include those very long and complicated clauses on indemnity or representations and warranties, in which you have to guarantee that you have all the rights and all the consents, and that you are not violating or infringing any rights. So that's one of the reasons why it's important to do it lawfully, to have legal rights to an image. Secondly, because if you infringe someone's image, someone's likeness, and you lose in court, or you receive a cease and desist letter and you lose in negotiations, you're most likely to pay a compensation. And depending, obviously, on the situation, this could be a big amount of money. So it's better to save that money and maybe use it for other purposes. And before the game is released, before you even start drawing the game or imagining the game, it's better to secure rights to someone's likeness. And thirdly, and this is something that is, let's say, specific to Poland. In some cases, if you lose a case against a third person because you have used their likeness without consent, you can be required to publish a public statement, in which you usually need to apologize for using that image without their consent. So I guess nobody wants to have their game taken down from the distribution. Nobody wants to pay compensation, nor make public statements. So for those reasons, I think it's really important to take your time before you start with your game, and think and check when you can use someone's resemblance, someone's likeness, someone's face, or very characteristic features in a legal and lawful manner.
And guys, maybe it goes without saying, but we would like to make it clear at the very beginning what is not the topic of this presentation. So first, we will not talk about animals. Second, we will not talk about some, let's say, non-human being creatures. So for example, Godzilla, zombies, and such things. And the third and the most important thing is that we will not talk today about fictional characters. So all characters that were created, for example, in books or in films or movies. So for example, Geralt, that was created in a book by Mr. Andrzej Sapkowski, is beyond this presentation, okay? So what is the topic of this presentation is a real person. We will be talking about real people, and both people who are still alive and people who died some time ago, so they are historical figures. We will be talking about celebrities, but not only celebrities, because everybody's got own and unique image. For example, Monika and me, we also got our faces and our likeness, and they are protected by something which we call right of publicity or personality right. But the name is not very important, to be honest. We just want to make it clear that we will be talking about real person, and we want to give you some, share with you some knowledge what to do if you want to use an avatar in your game that resembles real person, how to do in a lawful way, and how to make mistakes. And one additional remark, we'll be simplifying a bit, so sorry, it will be too easy for you today, and we'll try to make it a bit multi-jurisdictional, so we will go beyond Polish law and try to share with you some general rules. But of course, it does not mean that there are no, some details that could vary from country to country.
Okay, so let's start with some legal jargon or legalese. Lena already mentioned that we will be talking about right of publicity, with the other name is personality rights. And when you think of right of publicity or personality rights, just think about the name, likeness, or image, or any very specific, very characteristic features of a given person. So imagine what is very special about this real person and think about those features as the ones that could be protected by right of publicity or personality rights. And as Lena said, those two terms you can change them. They mean more or less the same. Right of publicity you will find most likely in all US-based literature, whereas personality rights is more a term that is used in the European Union or in Europe or civil code countries. The other important thing is that depending on jurisdiction, the personality rights can survive the death of the individual. In some countries, therefore, even if the person is dead, there are still some protection rights attached to that person's image. So you can't just freely use a face of someone who's dead, and you should always check that. Thirdly, the default rule is that to use someone's image, to use someone's likeness, you need a consent. And obviously, that's the most straightforward way to proceed. If you can get a consent, then you're on the safe side. But obviously, it's not that easy, and not everyone will be likely to give you consent, and not in every case it will be that easy to obtain a consent. There are some exceptions to use of an image without consent, and we will talk a little bit about that today. But as with all exceptions, because it is an exception to the general rule, so an exception is always very specific to a very specific set of facts or circumstances. So you should not just rely on those exceptions, specifically if those exceptions or if those examples come from different jurisdictions, because they may not apply to your specific case and they may not apply to your game, to your jurisdiction.
Yes, and we told you that we will, touch some multi-jurisdictional level, but you need to know that there is no such something like, global rule on right of publicity. So it could be different from country to country. For example, only in United States, you will have 40 different legal frameworks or how to use right of publicity. And good example is that Monika mentioned, because she said that this right can survive the death of a person, and it's a good example because we'll tell about it later, but in general you need to have a consent of successors of a person who died. But as for the period, how long you need to remember about having those consent, it could vary from country to country. In some places you will have 10 years, in some 20 years. In Poland it's about it's 20 years, but for example in some states in the United States it's perpetual. So so you need to remember about that. And what I want to add and emphasize here, you very often ask, okay, so which law I need to apply in my case? What I can advise you here is that first and basic rule is that you need to look at the topic from the perspective of the person whom you'd like to use in your game. So for example, if you want to use my likeness or Monika's likeness in the game, you should check legal rules, because we are based in Poland and probably will die in Poland. But if you want to use, for example, John Lennon likeness, or for example Yoko Ono likeness, you need to check, relevant rules of relevant state in the United States. So this is the thing.
Okay, so we've been using these terms, likeness, image, face, name, but and also specific features. So what is it? What does constitute someone's likeness? And hopefully you have the Q&A windows open. Can you quickly write us, who do you recognize? Who is depicted on those pictures? I'll give you maybe 10 seconds and hopefully you'll come up with correct answers. Those examples should be fairly easy, so hopefully you'll
incorrect answers are also, we invite you also to write incorrect examples or answers.
Okay, so hopefully you identified those individuals, those persons. And let's start with the tattoo owner, or the face of that has a tattoo on. So hopefully you all wrote Mike Tyson, because that's actually Mike Tyson's tattoo that we used for this presentation. And this tattoo is a very significant element, and it is a part of his, let's say, personality and media persona. And you will easily recognize him by just looking at this very specific tattoo. And such features, such as tattoos, hairstyle, body type, and body, the way the body is built, could constitute features that make a specific person recognizable. So those specific features would constitute a likeness of someone. The other example, the glasses of a famous footballer. We will talk about him a bit later. Again, it could be a piece of clothing, a piece of attire that is used constantly by a specific person, so that it becomes a sort of an emblem of that person, a badge of origin, I would say. When you look at that person wearing this attire or wearing this piece of clothing, you say, oh, that's John, or oh, that's Mark. The other thing is a specific clothing or a specific walk. And I think Charlie Chaplin is a very good example. At least in his movies, he always wore, specific clothes, little hats and a cane and a suit. And this picture actually is taken from a film. As you may know, Robert Downey Jr. played Charlie Chaplin. And in fact, you can't really say whether that's Charlie Chaplin, the original, or Robert Downey Jr. But for the film, his likeness was used. Downey Jr. resembled Chaplin as much as possible. So all those features, or those little details that are, let's say, outstanding details about a given person, could constitute their likeness, their image. That's how you recognize a person from a different one. And also, because of those features, you can recognize a person even in a parody, even if it's in a different, let's say, character, if it's a caricature or something, because of those outstanding features. I just want to make one note regarding tattoos. There's a whole other subject regarding tattoos, whether they are copyrightable works, who owns rights to tattoos. We will not go into that, unfortunately, because of time constraints. But please also remember then, when you are using someone's tattoo in your game, you want to apply it on your character, you should think not only about copyright, but also personality rights, and whether or not this tattoo is distinctive and can identify a real person.
Okay, guys, and now let's practice a bit. On the left, you can see a guy. He was mentioned by Monika a few minutes ago. And on the right, you can see a screenshot. Sorry, maybe otherwise from the game. So this guy, he's a football player. At present, probably he's a trainer, but that time he played in Juventus, and when he played in Juventus, he sued makers of League of Legends because of using, as he said, his image in a game without his consent. I don't know whether you think that those figures are similar. Maybe you can comment in Q&A, but we can tell you what the court decided. The court decided that the court agreed with the statement of claims of Mr. Edgar Davids and decided that all those features, so this very, characteristic sport glasses, dreadlocks, in general, hairstyle, very aggressive style and posture, color of the skin, it all together makes the figure and the avatar resembles of Mr. Edgar Davids, and therefore his claim was accepted. So this is the lesson how you should not do it. I mean, if you want to do it that way, you need to have a consent. And this is another story about Edgar Davids.
Yes. So again, you have a picture of Edgar Davids and a character that is called Lucio. And is a playable character in an Activision Blizzard's game. Now, we leave it up to you to decide whether Edgar Davids' likeness was used or not. What do you think? There could be an infringement? Would you say there is infringement because Lucio is so closely similar to the real person? You can note the glasses. Are they similar or not? The dreadlocks. Is it someone resembling Edgar Davids or not? So we would really like to know your thoughts, but we can tell you that at least for the moment there's no court case nor negotiations. So apparently Edgar Davids or his lawyers decided that maybe there are no grounds for a lawsuit with regards to this particular character. Also, maybe because the specific game that this character is used in is not a sport game, so there's no direct connection between what Edgar Davids used to do and the playable character.
If you ask me, I would say that they are totally different, but of course, it's my opinion. Okay, guys, the next thing, probably you know this screen very well. I don't want to discuss it in details. Of course, the concert of Travis Scott in Fortnite was agreed, arranged, and with all consents, it's obvious. But I want to tell you here two things. The first thing is that the technique that you use to create your your skin or avatar is irrelevant. I mean, you can use plain photo, render photo, hologram, drawing, whatever. If at the end of the day you will have in your game some skin or avatar that resembles a real person, you're at risky situation. And another thing is that sometimes, and now very often, you ask, if I use artificial intelligence, what happens if artificial intelligence generates some skin or avatar, and at the end of the day the skin is similar to real person? Who is responsible for that? And this is very tricky question, because at present there is really global discussion about that, who is responsible for artificial intelligence actions. And I will not give you a straight answer, but I would advise to be very careful in using artificial intelligence, because if you make the game public, you are responsible for that, and you are responsible for dissemination of somebody's image. So you are also at risk, legal risk, if you do that.
Okay, another example on when the likeness of someone was used without consent, and when the game developer got in trouble. You might have heard about this litigation of former college athletes and against electronics AVTs, I think. The players just sued the company because they claimed that the avatars, the game players, just resembled them entirely. So everything was copied, let's say, not only the clothes, the sporting gear, but the number, the player's number, all those specific features of a given player, even his weight, his height, and everything. And this case was judged in the US. So beware that this is the judgment of a US court, which might not be applicable in other jurisdictions. But the US court said, well, yes, there is an infringement because you've used the likeness of football players. You did not ask for consent. And in fact, what you did was almost a straightforward copy. You did not add anything creative, and you did not transform the likeness in a manner that would kind of cut or break this link between a real person. So what the court is trying to say is, if you want to use someone's likeness and for some reasons you cannot or don't have the consent, try to be creative about that image, about that likeness, and change as many features as possible, specifically those characteristic features that we talked about. Don't use someone's tattoo, don't use someone's, hairstyle. Otherwise, you just risk a lawsuit.
And this is very good background for the next case. Probably you know it well. But sometimes very often you ask how much I need to change in the person, how deeply I need to change the person to omit legal risk. Or this is my favorite. You ask in percentage. So you ask what percentage of the person I need to change not to infringe. And this is very tricky question, and nobody will answer that way. This is not a story about numbers, this is not a statistic. And of course, and this is the most important point, being only inspired by some person's style is okay, but this is very thin line between inspiration, which is here, and it's okay from the legal perspective, and infringement, which is here. If you copy the most distinctive feature, probably you will infringe. And this is the case. This is the court case. On the left you can see a celebrity. This is Lindsay Lohan, and she sued a game developer for the game GTA 5, and she claimed that this picture, this avatar, is her because of special type of body, because of some additional gadgets, for example, phone, for example, jewelry on hand, because of the same posture and gesture, this peace gesture. And what the court did in this situation, the court decided that it was only, we would say in Poland that it's only an inspiration. So this is, some satiric representation of modern celebrity. It's okay to do that. So, so this is an information for you if you want to be inspired by someone, how to do it in, let's say, more or less legal way. But of course, you need to remember that this assessment could vary from country to country, from court to court. And this is another example. On the left, you can see a real person. I don't know who is she exactly, but I think that she is a singer, Miss Kirby, and she sued, claiming that the avatar on the right is her, and of course was used, and her image and likeness was used without her consent. I don't know what you think about this case. I'm curious, what's your opinion? But for me is less similar than Lindsay Lohan, and the court agreed with that and dismissed the claim and said that this is not an infringement.
Okay, so we told you that you can be inspired by a real person, and that's fine. If you want to use a real person's image, then it's best to have his consent or hers consent. The US court said, well, if you want to use someone's likeness, then transform it, be creative about it. And here is another, let's say, area that could be helpful to you if you want to use someone's image, someone's likeness, without really requesting their consent. Again, across jurisdictions, there is a certain agreement that when someone's face, likeness, image is used in parody, as a caricature, then it's fine, that it should be okay, because these are the rules of parody. You just exaggerate, you use someone's features, sometimes to just criticize them, and sometimes just to make your piece, your work, a fun project. But as with all rules, there are exceptions, and the exception here, or the limit to this rule, is that even if you are using a parody of a real person, you have to be really careful not to use it in a negative way. So the use cannot be discriminatory or defamatory. You really have to pay attention to whether the way you use it, the way you portray this, even a person in a parody, does not put that person in a negative light. And this court case, this is a judgment of European Court of Justice, states more or less what I just told you. So the parody is okay. There is a general exception. Well, there is an acceptable exception that you can use parody, and you can use an artwork and parody it. But there is this limit. You cannot go beyond putting someone in a negative light. Okay, another example concerns public figures and public persons. And again, across majority of jurisdictions, there is this, let's say, rule that a public person can take a little bit more beating than a regular person, let's say. And by beating, I mean you can criticize that person, you can use them in a parody, you can use their image, but only in specific circumstances. So you can use the image, for example, of a president when he is actually doing his duties, his presidential duties, and if you cannot go beyond that. And here are two examples. The one that you probably recognize most is the General Manuel Noriega, and the other one is the jumping Pope Benedict the 16th, as far as I remember. And with regards to the jumping Pope, obviously you can say, well, that's a sort of parody. It's not negative. You're maybe not putting the Pope in a very negative light, so that could be acceptable. With regards to General Manuel Noriega, the case was judged in the US. Noriega was depicted in, well, he claimed he was depicted in Call of Duty Black Ops 2, and he said that his likeness was used without his consent, and therefore the publisher of the game was infringing his rights. But the court, the US court said that the First Amendment in the US law, which guarantees freedom of speech, outweighs the rights of publicity that would be applicable to Noriega. I think this case is quite controversial, and you will find various assessments of this case. And obviously this is a case that, again, that was judged in the US, so the First Amendment there provides for this freedom, but it would be interesting to see whether the courts would follow similar path in different jurisdictions, because you can actually see that the likeness, where the similarity between the character in the game and the real person are quite close. Okay, so we did tell you in the beginning that we will talk about dead celebrities, or celebs, as they are called. And yes, dead celebrities are still playable characters, and their likeness is used in games. Here are two examples. One is Bruce Lee, and the other one is Marilyn Monroe. And with regard to use of dead people images, or dead celebrities images, as Lena said, you really need to be very careful, because it does depend on the jurisdiction. It does depend on the country. In Poland, there is this provision that after the death of a person, there is a 20-year period in which his or her successors can still pursue any infringement of an image or likeness. But that varies. There are some states or some countries where this protection of an image is perpetual. So even if a person is dead for many, many years, you still can't use their likeness or their image. Well, you can ask, what about historical persons, historical figures? What about people that are dead for centuries? Is that okay? Or do I still have to kind of forgo this idea and stick to real people, but those who are alive? With historical figures, the general assumption, let's say, is that you can use their likeness and you can use their image, specifically if some time passed since their death. But what is important is that you should not misrepresent historical facts about those historical figures. So you should stay true to the facts of that person, to historical events that the person participated in. You should not, again, falsify those persons. But that's a general rule, let's say, and it's something that you should take into account. But obviously you could ask, well, but who's going to sue me? And that's a very good question. Who could sue you for violating rights of George Washington? Well, and the question depends on jurisdiction, and also depends on succession rights, because in some countries you have those trusts and estates that govern the estate of a dead poet or a dead author of a dead person. So you should be quite careful about that. The general rule is, yeah, okay, but still be careful and try not to falsify the facts. And here is an example of why it is important not to falsify the facts. This is another example taken from Call of Duty Black Ops 2, and it concerns children of Joseph Savimbi, who was a leader of an Angolan rebel group. He fought the government in Angola, and his likeness, his image was used in a game. But in this particular game, he was portrayed as this murderous, barbarian person who barely spoke English and was, like very third world person. And children of this general sued a French distributor of, I think it was Activision Blizzard, and they claimed that this particular depiction of their father as this brute, as this barbarian, is just inconsistent with how he behaved, how he was in reality. They were not suing because of the use of his face or his likeness, but they were just trying to state that what happened was really that the game undermined the reputation of this political leader. They lost. The French court dismissed the case, but the French court dismissed the case because of some procedural issues and not because he decided there was no defamation. So again, this is a guideline that you should take into consideration, that even if you have a political person or historical figure and you feel free to use it, there is this limit of facts and that you should not falsify the facts, and you should be careful about not putting that particular person maybe in a very negative light, because who knows, maybe the successors of that particular person will feel offended.
This is another example of the topic that Monika mentioned and touched. If you are not involved into Polish matters, I can only tell you that this is the guy on the first page of the magazine. He's a journalist, and this is to show you that even if you get a consent, even if there is any exception that enables you to use somebody's image or likeness in the game, you should be very careful as for the context in which you want to put the person, because as you can see, this guy was presented here as Nazi. He's in a Nazi suit. There is additional description in Polish, prawie jak Goebbels, which means in English almost like Goebbels, and we all know that Goebbels was a minister of propaganda of Nazi Germany. So, and this is offensive context, so you need to be very careful. This is real example, and it was a court case in Poland, and a court decided to agree with the lawsuit of this guy.
Okay, another controversial issue is, this is again also a case from the Polish jurisdiction, and it is about President Komorowski, who was in the office when the case was brought to court. And this is a screen from the game. The game really was about just running around and shooting the president, Komorowski. And An interesting fact is that this case was judged not on the basis of copyright, not on the basis of right of publicity or personality rights, but criminal law. And criminal charges were brought against the developer, the game developer, who created and then published on his website this game. There is a specific provision in the criminal law in Poland that forbids defamation of a president who is in the office. So even if the president is a public figure, even if you can use him in a parody, you need to be aware of the limits, and criminal law is one of the limits that can just block your game.
Exactly, and this is another example which shows, a difference between, for example, Polish attitude and US attitude, because as you can see here, you've got public figures. At the time when the game was created, they for sure were public figures. And let's make it short. In general, in US, they are more relaxed about using public figures, for example, in games and making a parody with them. But again, you need to be careful and pay attention from which country you take a person and put it into your game.
And so moving to some special rules, obviously we're from Poland, so Chopin is protected, specifically protected, his image. There is a specific law regarding use of Frédéric Chopin's image and music. And two examples, the first one is Eternal Sonata and the other one is Frédéric. Both games based on life of Frédéric Chopin. The first one, the Eternal Sonata, to be honest, for me, it's difficult to say whether the likeness of Chopin was really used because it is quite transformed. So maybe in this particular situation, the publisher or the game developer did not have to obtain a consent from the ministry in Poland that kind of overlooks Chopin's estate. But I cannot confirm that 100%. The other game, the Frédéric Chopin's likeness, I think, is more recognizable and it's a more straightforward use. And I assume that the game developer asked for permission and obtained it.
Yes, and another example with special rules is related with members of national sport teams, but those who are in national outfits. So they make their images exclusively available to relevant sport association. And the same with players and sportsmen who are from the Olympic family. So they make their images available to relevant, Olympic committee. And why this is important? Because you might think that it's only very Polish example, but it's not. Probably most of countries got very similar rules in their national jurisdiction, in their national law. And why we are talking about that? It's very important because if you want to have a member of a sport team and national outfit, you don't go to this guy to request him for a consent, but you need to go to Olympic Committee or to relevant sport association. So remember about that. And another thing, it's a tricky example. Maybe you know this guy. Probably you know this guy. This is Michael Schumacher. He is a driver in Formula One, and his face is registered as a trademark. So and what's more, not only as a trademark, but in particular, it's registered for video games and computer games. So if you'd like to have, for example, his face in your game, you not only need to have his consent to use his likeness, but you also need to have a license from him to use this trademark in your game. So be careful with that. Fortunately for you, this trademark expires a few years ago, but there are a lot of other trademarks with faces, and you need to check that before making your game public.
Okay, so we talked a lot about consent, and that was our repeated advice here. We told you a little bit about some situations where this consent would not be required. But obviously, the most secure way is to have a consent, and you can obtain a consent, a permission, in a, let's say, it could be a one-pager, or it could be a very, very long and complicated licensing agreement. But regardless of whether it's a one-page document or a very, very, very long document, as a game developer, as a creator of a game, what you should look into and what you should pay the most attention to is obviously the scope of the consent. From your perspective, the wider, the better. The person that is signing the consent should allow you not only the use of image, but also publication, distribution, any changes to the likeness, any changes to the face. You should be allowed to use the face in a game, in promotional materials, on social media, etc., or you should be allowed to use it in any media, not only in video games, but maybe in a board game. Also, you should determine whether this consent allows you to use someone's image forever or only for a defined time, and what time would be applicable to you, what time would be the best for you. And also, you should look for those provisions regarding governing law and jurisdictions. Obviously, if you are the let's say the stronger party in those negotiations, you can negotiate to have your jurisdiction and your governing law included. But if you are on the other side and this public person or celebrity is the stronger in those negotiations, they can choose governing law and jurisdiction, and that has tremendous importance because it sheds different light, or can shed different light on terms and notions and provisions that you feel familiar with. So this is just a short list of what you should think of and maybe include in your consent form. Regarding minors, please remember that usually parents should sign it or countersign it.
And this is a good example of problems with consent, because probably you know the case. Gwen Stefani and No Doubt members agreed to use their likeness in Band Hero of Activision, but then they sued Activision and they said, "Oh no, Activision, we agreed to have our faces in a game, but only singing songs of No Doubt. No Britney Spears, no Rammstein, and so on." And we've got a very big court case. Finally, we don't know what is the judgment because the matter was settled. But this is another lesson for you, that you need to check the scope of the consent. So all those things that Monika mentioned, you need to take care of that.
Okay, sometimes when you don't create the image yourself, but you are using the image from stock images, you might feel that whatever is on the internet is just free to use, but that's not the case, not always. So please do take some time and read terms and conditions. They might be very long, but they give you important information. Because first of all, you should check whether the stock image of a video game character, can be actually used for video games. Can it be sold? Can it be distributed? Can it be used in multimedia production? Sometimes the license that those stock images platforms are giving out is very limited, and you have to buy the business option or additional option to actually have wider rights. Secondly, almost all, if not all, platforms that are offering stock images have a very long provision regarding what you cannot do to this image of a person. And here is just a list of few examples. You should not portray this person in an offensive way. You should not use the image that you buy from the stock in a promotion of tobacco products or adult videos, or in a way that would be immoral, obscene, or place that person, that image, in a negative light. So again, there could be some limitations and restrictions that come with stock images that you should be aware of.
And guys, what with withdrawal of the consent? In some countries, it's possible to withdraw a consent to use somebody's image or likeness. So be careful with that. For example, in Poland, it's possible. And the consequences of that is, of course, that you will need to stop marketing the game. So it's very serious. And similar consequences are related with lack of consent. So if you forget to have a consent to obtain it, it leads to consequences that Monika mentioned at the very beginning of the talk. So you could be sued, the court could issue interim injunction, so you will be ordered to immediately stop marketing the game. Most probably you also will need to withdraw, for example, some gadgets from the market. If the person is depicted on the gadgets, you will need to pay damages, you will need to publish apologies. So, and the main thing is that, of course, you will need to change the avatar in your game. It's very time consuming, and probably you will need to obtain another consent and so on. So it could be game over for you.
Okay, so just to summarize and some key takeaway points, if you want to use someone's image, if you want to use someone's likeness, please do get a consent, because that's the best solution for you. If it is not possible, then maybe you should explore those exceptions, public figures, inspiration, parody. Think about how you can transform the likeness or the image of a real person to such an extent that maybe this character in the game does not evoke a real person. That would be obviously the best solution. Please do remember that in any case, even if you use a likeness in parody, even if you use likeness of a public person or historical figure, but public person maybe is a better example, you should not misrepresent that person. You should not falsify the facts or put that person, that character, in a negative light, because that can actually open a whole new range of problems. Please remember about special rules. If you want to use a specific person, a specific historical figure, maybe there are specific laws attached to that person, to protection of that person's estate and image. And finally, unfortunately, there's no unified right of publicity. So each jurisdiction, each country has their own set of rules, and you should be aware of at least those major jurisdictions that you will deploy your game or distribute your game. And here you can see the publication that we kind of wrote at the Wardyńskie Partners. Here is the link, and it is a number of articles to do with game development and all the issues that game developers can come across. So feel free to visit our website and download it, have a read. If you have any comments, questions, or maybe you disagree with our assessment, please feel free to contact us. We are here to help, to exchange knowledge, and to share our experience. So
this publication is totally free, so we will invite you to download it. And that's all.
Thank you very much.
From us, from our side. Are there any questions? I can't see them.
We don't see any questions, so thank you very much for your time, and hopefully we...
Monika, can you say anything?
Unfortunately, I can't see the question. Yeah, well, unfortunately, no.
Okay, can you read the question for us, please? Yes, it's correct. Oh, it's it's a complex question. I would say that first you need to. I would advise to look at the domicile where the person is based. So I think that it's the best option.
So it's not specifically citizenship, but it's where the person lives, because sometimes you can I don't know, you can have the Polish citizenship but live in France all your life and still be a Polish citizen. So maybe it's better to first look into the laws of where the person lives, and that could be an indication of whether you can use that person's likeness or not. But also think of this example that I talked about children of this Angolan leader. They moved to France. They were no longer living in Angola. They lived in France, and they sued the French distributor of the game. So sometimes when someone's rights are infringed, that person will look for his own jurisdiction. So the court can be brought against a distributor or most likely distributor in the court for the claimant, and not for the defendant, for example. But there are specific rules, and that depends on the facts there. With those infringements, these are quite complicated cases.
Okay, if there are no other questions, thank you very much for your attention. If you would like to contact us, we are free to do it. So we invite you to do it. And have a nice evening or good afternoon, whatever time is in your country. And see you.
See you. Bye.
See you. Bye.